Welcome to OpenExO Live on a Tuesday. Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name is Lance Pepler, and I just want to remind you that this is the Tuesday edition. We had a different time slot, obviously. It's during my day, it's during my guest's night, so I don't have to stay up late tonight, which is good. And I wanted to remind you that there is still an OpenExO Live on a Thursday, so the regular OpenExO with Kevin Allen, so stay tuned for that. It'll be at the normal time that it is normally on a Thursday. So OpenExO's purpose is to transform the world for a better future. And part of this purpose is to assist organizations of all sizes, private and public sector, to transform and thrive in the new economy. And we need that now after COVID, going through COVID, and we need to transform and bring out new services and solutions. So this Tuesday edition of OpenExO Live, we focus on OpenExO partners, and we've been doing that for the last 2 or so months. And these partners, very, very experienced, particularly the one today, and they've gone through certification processes. They've got consultants who work for them, and they assist organizations to transform. So if you have any questions, I'm just going to put the link in the comments. If you have any questions whatsoever, then please feel free to ask. And there's the first one. Hi, Julie. Hi, Abhishek. Nice to have you here. And I'm going to introduce you to our guest. We're very, very lucky to have Emily Sidney Smith from our partner ExO Works. And ExO Works helps successful companies excel at transformational innovation. So I'm going to bring on Emily now. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Lance. Great to see you.
How are you today?
Great, thank you.
Good. So we've already got 2 people, Julie and Abhishek. And I just want to say, if anyone's got any comments, then please put them in. I'm going to ask Emily, the more difficult the question, the better. Hey, Emily, you like difficult questions?
I really do. So, please go ahead. Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us today. It's really a privilege to have you. You've got a lot of experience in this space, obviously been doing it for a long time. So where am I speaking to you from today, Emily?
Well, I think you're in South Africa, but I'm in Sydney, Australia.
Yes.
After 17 years in New York, thought that this would be a safer place to be during COVID.
And how is Australia at the moment? Have you gone through the first wave? What's the situation like there at the moment?
So I'm pretty proud. Actually, we realised that the Australian government's COVID response was the best ExO example that we've ever seen. Within a couple of days, they actually pulled together using a lot of the ExO attributes, which I'm happy to share in more detail if you wish. We had one state that got a bit out of control, and some of that flowed over to our state. But again, that's now under control, and we actually haven't had any community transmission for 4 days in our state. So pretty proud.
Wow, nothing at all. That's brilliant. So hopefully it can stay that way and you can keep it like that. And maybe you can share a little bit more a bit later around the model and how they did it. But Emily, can you give us a bit of your background and what led you to forming and joining ExO Works, and what you were doing in New York, etc. So a bit of a background of your career.
Great. So I started working on the deregulation of the electricity markets happening in Australia and New Zealand, which was fantastic because we had to always be thinking, 9 months in advance of what the big issues would be, talking with the top CEOs, a really great way to start a career, and think about how much things were changing. I then worked with a startup that we took to a $300 million valuation over a couple of years, again in the energy space. And I'd always wanted to live in New York, and I happened to win a green card, which you use or lose. So
wow, fantastic.
moved to New York and went into private equity, but a strange part of private equity that is very much focused on startups, but operational ones, not the ones that are actually developing out technologies, the ones that are actually applying them at scale. And also a strange part of private equity in that they really don't have losers. It's not like the VC model where you hope that one out of many might come good. This was, really consistent 3 to 5 times returns over a couple of years. So a great way to be in there and really looking at the quality of due diligence and these potential companies and their leadership. And I was always reading a technology book a week, at least for the last 20 years. It really just fascinated me. didn't figure that I was allowed to play in it, but I just loved it. And eventually I read Salim's book maybe the first week that it came out. He was actually speaking at a friend's conference in Florida a couple of weeks later, and I met him there and said, this is the most inspirational thing I've seen. How do I get involved?
Wow.
And they were just about to do the first ever fast track. They'd done one sprint before, which I wasn't on, but I was then on all of the fast tracks, except for one out of the 7. And they also were about to kick off with the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, and they really needed people with an energy background. And so, it was just a perfect fit to start there. And the rest is history. I became CEO. So, for those who don't know, OpenExO and ExO Works split into 2 different companies now it's 2.5 years ago. And I became CEO about 18 months ago of this company that focuses on actually working with the largest companies in the world and actually bringing the ExO methodology into those large companies.
That's fantastic. And how has ExO Works has had a lot of customers, been very involved? What kind of work have you been doing in the last 18 months since you were CEO? Maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of ExO Works and the work that you've done and do.
Great. So for those of you who know about the sprint process, a lot of the work that we do is that, and some workshops and follow-on work as well. But fantastic companies like Boston Scientific that are really global companies, BHP. We've worked with a number of very regional companies as well. ALEC is an amazing company in Dubai that's in construction. Vodacom all over Africa. Companies, in Thailand and some really interesting companies that are really willing to change. I mean, we've had one company that basically said, we realize that our whole structure isn't quite right. Come in and tell us what our future should be. And they actually started out thinking that they're a construction company and ended up saying, actually, we're a logistics company and we're going to completely relaunch on that basis. And then there are other companies that just want something very narrow. They've got a project. They need to do things that are tenfold better within that project, and they want us to come in and work on that. So it's been a fantastic ride, especially as we can see billions of dollars of actual returns on investment from those companies. I think that there's a lot of discussion in the market that 72% of innovation projects around the world are failing. And we've actually flipped that on its head. 75% of the initiatives coming out of these sprints are getting approved and actually going through to profitable implementation, and we can actually show billions of dollars of returns from them.
And is there a type of organization that you engage with? Because I'm thinking of Vodacom, one of the most successful companies in South Africa. So they definitely weren't in crisis when they engaged with you, and I presume ALEC weren't either. Are you seeing that more progressive companies engage with you, or generally companies that are in a crisis, or is it a cross-section of both? Or maybe not crisis at all?
Yeah, so we focus mainly on large companies, generally over $1 billion valuation and over 1,000 staff, because it's the really high intensity work that we know we do best. And some companies, for instance, two of the sprints that I ran as head coach before I became CEO were for a company that was in online trading, and Robinhood, that's now really famous, came out and said, we're going to offer free trades. And, this is a $25 billion company that said, that's 60% of our revenue that's about to evaporate. And so they brought us in to quickly pivot and get away from that and find new revenue sources. We have anything from that to the companies that are just saying, look, we need to just make sure that we're prepared for the future. We want to be different. And one of the wonderful moments that we actually had with that was that we were working with a particular division of a large global company, and the general manager of that division had actually started it 25 years ago. And he actually said during the Disrupt session, today's the first day I realized I could retire, because I've never seen my people actually come up with ideas at this scale that are so well validated.
Wow.
And I now feel comfortable that I could actually retire and this team is going to be able to continue to grow the company later. So, it's really nice to have the whole gamut of anything from disruption to just wanting to be the best in the world.
Awesome. And Emily, I'm going to put the website on so they can go and have a look at all the different case studies that are on your website. And it's a it's an excellent website, and they can see all the logos and all the work that you've done. But maybe we can take the first question, and it's from Eric Patel. And Eric, why aren't you asleep? Because he's from Boston. So I don't know what time it is in Boston. But he's asked, and we're going to get into this anyway, is how has ExO Works pivoted during the last 6 months? What are you doing differently that they would consider successful? How have you engaged with during this COVID crisis that we've been in?
Great. And hi, Eric. It's a while since I've seen you. So when this first started to happen, because, it's our jobs within ExO to watch out for exponentials, we got way ahead of the curve. And we had actually fully pivoted the company by the 23rd of February to be focused on this. And so we actually, and hi, Francisco, I just see you there as well. And so we started to actually put out all sorts of services that would be around crisis management. And in fact, a lot of the clients actually had that in place already. We called all of the past clients and said, what do you need? We can give you some things for free, some things would not be. And it was great to see them so engaged. I felt like these companies really had a sense of who they were and where they were going and which tools they needed to bring together and actually get active. And they actually didn't need us, which was really wonderful to see in most cases. They wanted some presentations about what was going on and to feel inspired, but then really felt that they had the tools themselves. And then as we started to progress, we said, right, most companies that we're seeing are actually only focused on trying to get back to 2019 kind of ideas. And that's kind of crazy because we don't fundamentally believe that that will ever happen. And so every company is going to need to do scenario planning, but the scenario planning itself is going to be the same. So let's just not have them all copy each other and spend that time. Let's actually do it for them, get it out into the market, and then they can actually spend their precious time working out what to do about it. So we worked with a scenario planning company and a lot of our coaches that we've been very engaged with over the past couple of years to do that scenario planning. And in many ways, the companies that we had already worked with really found that very useful. It was not necessarily the way of actually getting companies to come and say, yeah, we really believe that and we need to go ahead with it. And then what we really found was that coming back to the basics, the sprint process truly is so broad in its application that it really is what works. So even though we had done a lot of soul searching and a lot of pivoting and things, we actually never got far away from the basis of what we do anyway. And that's been really what's been valuable to the companies that, that we actually have a fantastic pipeline and companies are very interested in that process.
Fantastic. So let's just say hello to Julie and Francisco and Carlos. And if you have any questions, people are watching, please go ahead and ask them in the chat and I'll ask them of Emily. So Emily, you were mentioning the Australian response to COVID, and you were going to tell us about how they've used the exponential model. Could you give us a bit more information about that and your insights into that?
Absolutely. So first of all, the MTP, they just jumped onto the world one, which was flatten the curve. But what they did very quickly was realize that there were lots of different groups out in the community that were fantastic when it came to epidemiologists and all sorts. And so they really used leveraged assets and staff on demand very well and a lot of autonomy. And then they created this very quick dashboard to bring information real time together to one point, and then made decisions based on that in real time and got that information in very simple language out into the population. So those things were working really well. And then they said, actually, let's have a contact tracing app. And so they put that together way before any of the other companies did. In fact, the lady that put this together is now working with us.
Oh, wow.
A dear friend of mine. And they rolled that out in right at the beginning of April, basically, and had...
That's early.
Sure. Right. They had 7 million downloads in a couple of weeks. So most software companies would just be blown away from that. So they had the algorithms that they actually also used to engage the community. And so even though that app hasn't been used as much as you might imagine, it's because there've been very low transmission numbers. So there was a level of trust and a level of... so the politicians all got together and said, let's not be difficult like this, and let's actually support each other. Of course, you see a bit of a breakdown however many months later, but it's been pretty good on the whole.
Yeah, and well, the results are there. So there are no questions at the moment. So I'm going to ask you the big question of the day is, how do you see the world at the moment? Are companies and organizations coming out of, the COVID crisis? Are they emerging? Are they starting to engage with you? How are you seeing the market and the world at the moment?
So one of the big challenges with the traditional companies is that they actually did a number of things sort of fairly poorly leading into the crisis. And what we're seeing is the ramifications of that now in terms of the inability to make decisions. And in fact, when we see companies get very close to making decisions, it's almost invariably now when they start to shift seats in companies, and suddenly you're talking to a completely new group. And I think that the things that led up to that, firstly, most of these companies feel that understanding how the exponential organizations operate, the Amazons, the Googles of the world, was so opaque to them, such a just mystical idea that they kind of ran from it, and they didn't train their own people in it. And so now, that's happened even more. We've seen there's some fantastic data that has happened around decision-making in large companies. And if anyone wants to read the book, The Challenger Customer, it's mind-blowing. But basically, we've gone from big companies having a small group of people making a decision, then it was a bigger group within the same team and therefore fairly aligned ideas. And now it's on average 5.4 people, but from different teams who are often politically absolutely at loggerheads with each other. And so the net result is that the easiest thing to do is nothing. And so even when they do decide to do something, generally the buyers or decision makers have actually gone about 57% of the way through that decision before they actually bring in the people who could be supplying. And at that point, they've just commodified everything, and they just want the lowest common denominator rather than actually working with the suppliers who can say, but there's this other way, we could actually be adding this, and this is where you'd be getting the value. And so when you compound the sort of, we don't understand what's going on with, we don't know how to make a decision, and we haven't trained our people to actually work out what's going on, and then you get a crisis on top of it, of course, we're seeing this complete breakdown in decision making. You see people every so often, there'll be this flurry of people saying, okay, let's just go make some decisions, let's get on top of this. We've never had as many inbound leads as now, but then navigating through the sort of craziness of people who would really just still love for it to go back to 2019 is a lot of work.
Emily, we've got a question from Julie, and it's a difficult question, so I'm not... Just feel free if you can't answer it, but maybe give it your best shot. You can see it there as well. So she's from Sydney as well, and she works for a Big Four bank in the customer support packages. What do you see as best practice in this space? So I presume, let's say banking as a whole, because not go right down to customer support packages. But how do you see banking? Do you see any what do you see in the financial services space? Anything moving there? Anything happening?
Well, I think that the big banks, and hi, Julie, it looks like we should meet here in Sydney. The big banks seem to be thinking that everything is normal, even way before COVID had happened. They don't seem to be seeing that open banking rules could completely destroy their business, that blockchain literally takes away the need for middlemen and their entire businesses could evaporate. Most big banks are in incredibly commodified industries, and they think that this little tinkering of how they're going to be better to their customers, that the customers actually care, or that it actually makes a difference in their lives. It doesn't. And so we've actually just done a big process with a number of our coaches to actually work out how we should be messaging to financial services and what their big risks are. And I mean, we have, within half an hour, we had a 10-page document of all the risks.
Wow.
So I think that if those big banks don't turn around and act very differently, there will be the kind of carnage that we've seen in hospitality and retail in recent years.
So just to tell everyone that we've got about 5 or 10 minutes more of Emily's time, so valuable time. If you've got a question, now is the time to ask it, like Julie did now. And so I'll just ask you another question in the meantime. How do companies engage with you, Emily? Is there a process that you go with them? What is the engagement process leading up to a possible sprint, if that's the destination you want to take them? Do they reach out to you, and then do you have awake sessions? What's the general engagement cycle, opportunity cycle you go through?
So typically we would actually have a webinar with companies first, where we actually show off the proprietary case studies, because they have made so much money and there is a very clear sort of process. And for a lot of these companies, it's literally the first time that they've realized that something actually does work, rather than just throwing money down the drain again and again.
Yeah.
But what we find is that we do need to have so many different people buy into the process. And so it is a lengthy sales process. Often the CEO is involved. We're seeing behind the scenes that a lot of companies are about to change CEOs. And so, making sure that we're in with the new CEO and talking with them and making them understand what's going on is very, very important. And then just talking to so many people across the organization to make sure that they're feeling comfortable. Because the other thing that we've seen is that the innovation teams that were already getting sidelined in a very fundamental way before COVID, with 60% of those innovation teams being disbanded within large companies. Now we're seeing almost all of their funding, almost all of their political capital is gone. And so they can either be coming to us like, how do you save us? Or they're feeling much trying to keep us out of their territory in case we look like a replacement to them. And so we're very much having to also say, we're not a replacement, we're a way of boosting and completely accelerating what you're doing. And hey, all that work that you did pre-COVID, we could actually take that and within weeks actually have it usable and starting to be implemented. So those conversations are really important.
Sure. And how should people get hold of you, Emily? Can they go to your website? Have you got an email address? We can put it in the chat.
Happy to put, actually, I'm not sure if I can write in the chat myself, but my email address is Emily, EMILIE, @ExO.works.
Let me just put it in myself.
Thank you.
Great. And then you'll respond to them when they email you, obviously. So Emily, here we go. Emily at ExO Works, and I'll just put it in the chat quickly. So last warning, everybody, this is concluding time. So this is your last moment. If you want to have a question, then please do. I'm just going to put in here Emily's email address. Okay, cool.
And a shout out to my friends who are on the call. And great to see you.
Francisco and Eric, etc. So thank you so much for joining, Emily. I think we're going to leave it at that for today, but thank you so much for joining. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for taking the time, and I wish you everything of the best, and we'll look forward to seeing what you do next. for
Thank
ExO
you.
Works and for you. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. So thank you everyone for joining. Just remember that OpenExO Live is on a Thursday as well. It's normal time. So join Kevin Allen on a Thursday. And thank you very, very much for joining us today. And I'm just going to play out with an advert as we say goodbye. So thank you very much. Bye.